This is the Police Accountability Board regular meeting for Wednesday, January 8th, 2025. And at this time, I'm going to read our public notice. To access this meeting remotely, join from a PC, Mac, iPad, iPhone, or Android device using this URL listed below. If you do not wish for your name to appear on the screen, use the drop-down menu and click on Rename. To rename yourself to be anonymous. To request to speak, use the raise hand icon on the screen. To join by phone, dial 1-669-900-6833 and enter meeting ID 826-5339-6072. If you wish to comment during the public comment portion of the agenda, press *9 and wait to be recognized. And with that, that'll bring us to our land acknowledgements. The city of Berkeley recognizes that the community we live in was governed the territory of the Hushun, the ancestral and unceded land of the Churchill-speaking Ohlone people, and the ancestors, descendants of the Sonoran Band of Alameda County. This land was and continues to be of great importance to all the Ohlone tribes and descendants of the Maryland Band. As we begin our meeting tonight, we acknowledge and honor the original inhabitants of Berkeley, the documented 5,000-year history of vibrant community at the West Berkeley Shell Mine, and the Ohlone people who continue to reside in the East Bay. We recognize that Berkeley's residents have and continue to benefit from the use and occupation of this unceded stolen land since the city of Berkeley's incorporation in 1878. As stewards of the laws regulating the city of Berkeley, it is not only vital that we recognize the history of this land, but also recognize that the Ohlone people are present members of Berkeley and other East Bay communities today. Brings us to agenda item number 1, and that will be our roll call to order.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. For the record, this meeting was called at 6:33 p.m. It was called to order at 6:33 p.m. Now proceeding roll call. Chair Moore.
Present.
Vice Chair Wilson.
And for the record, she just texted me, she's looking for parking.
Okay, she'll be here shortly. Board Member Calavita.
Here.
Board Member Lethwich.
Here.
Board Member Cayetano. Here. Board Member Moses. Here. And Board Member Williams is currently out on leave of absence, granted by Councilmember Taplin. On behalf of the VPA, we have Director Aguilar, Investigator Wechter, Data Analyst Nadeem, Policy Analyst, myself, Samuel, sorry for doing that in order, and our admin, Anna Snyder. On behalf of the BPD, we have Chief Lewis joining us remotely, Lieutenant Rigo joining us in person. From the CAO's office, we have BCA Carter joining us, and from the City Manager's office, we have Dr. Chair, with that, we have the floor.
Excellent, thank you. And that brings us to agenda item number 2, approval of the agenda. Are there any additions, causes of interest, anything we need to discuss on the agenda? Any movement? Now's our time. Not seeing or hearing any. We're going to go ahead and move forward from this agenda item.
Chair, for just a point of order, we get a motion in a second, please.
Yes.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you.
To agenda item number 3, and that is public comment.
Okay. Again, Happy New Year and good evening, everyone. As a gentle reminder, our speakers for public comment are generally allotted up to 3 minutes, but may be allotted less time if there are many speakers. They may comment on any matter within the board's jurisdiction at this time, except for confidential personnel matters. I will be starting with those physically present before moving on to our virtual attendees. At this time, we don't have any members of the public physically present, so we'll now be moving on to virtual public comment. At this time, if you are joining remotely and would like to provide public comment, please use the raise hand icon or press *9 if you're dialing in. Again, this is public comment. Again, if you'd like to provide public comment, please use the raise hand icon or *9 if you're calling in. Chair, at this time, I do not see any hands.
Thank you, and that will take us to agenda item number 4. This is the approval of the minutes from the regular meeting of December 11th, 2024. Board Member Lethbridge.
I had one correction on page 10 of the packet under 8 subcommittee reports. It says motion to fold in the bodyguard camera subcommittee. It should be the body worn camera subcommittee.
Noted.
Are there any other changes or corrections to the minutes?
For that change, I move that the minutes be approved.
Make it a second, please.
Second.
Okay, motion carried.
That takes us to agenda item number 5, PPA staff report.
Okay, Mr. Chair, thank you. Board members, welcome back. Fellow colleagues, members of the public, thank you for joining us in this new year. We have some updates we want to provide to you. As we're going to discuss later, our annual report is underway, and we'll discuss a potential timeline to get it to you. We've been working with the Vice Chair and Board Member Moses are our liaison to the board. So we're still in the preliminary phase, but we do have a layout or a timeline rather that we wanted to provide to you today. Since last meeting, we informed the PAB that you have my commitment to formally start a program for our collective use. So we are doing preliminary search of social media consultant firms. And we have a lot of valuable local resources that we can definitely leverage, including university resources. So we're looking at the best fit for that. We have a preliminary program of calendars that we want you to consider. Again, nothing is set in stone, but as you develop your work plan for the retreat and for your annual work plan, we just want you to consider some of the things that we'll be doing from our office perspective. If you haven't heard yet, our former Mayor Adegin, now Senator Adegin, was recently appointed the chair of the Public Safety and Human Services Committee. So just putting that out there in case you're interested in some legislative recommendations. We do have now somebody from the formerly with the city representing you in Senate. Since last meeting, we have submitted per your request, the downtown task force and the FIP report again to the city council. Per the conversation at the last meeting, we requested that they be at 2 separate meetings. So the downtown task force was presented for the January 21st meeting and the FIP for the February meeting. The council's rules and agenda committee met this past week, and that's the committee that reviews the proposed agenda for the next regular meeting. They had that proposal to hear the downtown task force report, and they decided at this time they're going to send it to the public safety committee for the public safety committee to review first before it goes to full council. And just for community education, situational awareness, the rules and agenda committee is currently comprised of the mayor, the council member Bartlett, council member Taplin, and they reached this decision unanimously. There was an emphasis about the additional dialogue on access to records for legal review and balancing the jurisdiction between the PAB with the PAB can access under city ordinance and charter and what's restricted by state law. So that would be something, just previewing you what the discussion may look like at the public safety committee. We will definitely keep you updated, and we'll certainly want representation from somebody on the PAB to come along with the office to field any questions there. I wanted to take a quick stop to just provide our investigator Jason Wechter to give us some updates on NACO news and or training opportunities that are coming up.
NACO has not yet scheduled any of its monthly webinars. There will be 9 this year, but there is a webinar next Tuesday, January 21st, put on by Lexipol, which provides the policy for the Berkeley Police Department. And this is a webinar on the duty to intervene, what we have learned since George Floyd. And it will look at the legal parameters for public safety involving the duty to intervene, how some agencies are successfully implementing the duty into their operations, moving beyond just use of force, and how effective implementation of the duty to intervene into agency culture and day-to-day operations is essential to organizational and individual success. So again, this will be Tuesday, January 21st at 10 a.m. Pacific time. It'll be 75 minutes in length. They are recorded, so if you can't watch it live, you would have an opportunity to watch the recording.
Thank you. I did also want to, before I turn it over to our friends, the city manager's office, update that, there's an important report, will circulate the San Francisco Department of Police Accountability. They put out an audit, and it was regarding some of RIPA data and some data integrity issues. I think that would be important for us to consider as well. And I think I haven't read it fully. I know some of the background on it, but it was born out of a personnel complaint. They found some anomalies in the officers' data collection and reporting, and then they did a full audit of 2018 to 2023, and they came forth with several recommendations regarding how to improve their data as it relates to RIPA and potential misrepresentations of race. So I think it's a good report for us to consider as well as we do our work. And now I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Redondo, see if there's any updates from the city manager's office.
Thank you, Director Aguilar. I was just no updates, but everyone had a nice break and a happy new year, and just looking forward to continuing our partnership together. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Now, we'll take any questions if you have any.
I'll just open it up, a little effort, please.
Yeah, I have a question. So on page 87, we have Lexipol policy updates, and I know we don't agendize these, those are mostly not just an FYI. But I looked at those, and there are a lot of very significant policy and issues, including that the vehicle pursuits policy that replaced General Order B6 was adopted. And that came as a surprise to us because we've been working so hard on that policy and hadn't heard directly from had been implemented, because that triggers our review time period. And I'm just wondering if you could remind us about the process, because my recollection is that the department like posts these to you, and then there's an acknowledgement, but if you don't acknowledge it, I don't know, I don't remember the process, but I think it's really important that we're clear about it. Because it's really important, and I'd hate for things to slip through the cracks, you know, important policy changes.
Yes, so we do have access, I'll confirm that, to the Lexipol system. And our team receives it. I was not under the interpretation that a policy, especially the vehicle pursuit one, we would receive notification in that way. It was my interpretation of the charter that it would be a different notification outside from being posted on Lex. I misunderstood that I just need to touch base with the chief to make sure, hey, when we push out a policy, that's your notification. So there are several other policies that we do get the record of it, but that the board is not reviewing, and which is also, I think, why the chief has worked with us to get the board members to get access to the Lexipol system. But again, I don't think we established formally that is the notification process. I think that's something out of this particular example that we can clarify moving forward.
Isn't there something about you officially acknowledging when something is submitted? I recall that there was something kind of a quirk in the process where they send it to you, and once you acknowledge it, then it's like you're saying okay or something?
Well,
Am I correct?
and that system is the system that they have for officers, so that they acknowledge that they have received it. We weren't necessarily using that acknowledgement system for our charter purposes. So, and perhaps that was a misinterpretation on my behalf, but I thought that the process would have been a more formal, outside of lexical, hey, this is a new policy.
That's what
Starts
I,
the process.
that's what I thought too. Lieutenant Rico, do you know how that works? Because we obviously really need to understand how.
Yeah, the director is correct. That notification, I think that you're referring to is with regards to the staff acknowledging that they've read and understand the policy. When they log on to the system, it'll be there in a queue, they read it. At the bottom, it'll say acknowledge, they click a button, and that tells the system that that particular user has acknowledged the policy.
But do you know if that applies equally to us? Because I remember someone in the department kind of saying that that's for you guys too. But I also was under the impression that there'd be a more formal, more open announcement when.
I don't know the answer to that. Not sure how the system's set up for everyone here to receive that same notification policy.
I can read the charter language. It says 17A, the chief of police shall submit all newly adopted departmental policies and revisions to the board within 30 days of implementation.
What does that mean? Submit.
Well, it didn't say the specific mechanism, but I assume that it requires the chief of police to actually inform us as opposed to the director's office.
The chief is raising her hand, she's.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I think just to start with, I think what board member Leftwich is remembering or recalling or referring to is the fact that when you first get a policy update in your queue, you can see what the changes are from the prior version. And so you're able to see what's been changed from the prior version. Once you acknowledge the receipt of that policy, then when you go and pull that policy up, you will see the current policy. You won't see those updates in there anymore. So that might have been the recollection that that you were working with board member Leftwich. Secondly, the reason why we have ensured that there's access to Lexipol and the KMS notifications around the policy is that in that sense, at the moment that an officer receives the policy and everyone in the department receives the policy, the officers of DPA and the PAB members with their access to Lexipol policies see that a policy has been updated. We do regular updates where we get Lexipol recommendations around changing things from like he, she to they and things like that. There's a bulk of updates that happen regularly. And so to ensure that one doesn't come through and you don't get an email saying that something changed, we automated the system. You are part of the same automated system that everybody else in the department is on so that you don't miss that. And just to clarify, while the charter requires that you get notice of a policy within 30 days when it's updated, there's nothing that precludes you at any point in time from deciding that you want to have a conversation around a policy, right? And setting a subcommittee, working through that policy, talking to the department, making recommendations to me around edits in policy. And so that 30-day time limit is a notification piece simply, which is accomplished via this mechanism that ensures that nothing comes through that you don't get a copy of.
Okay, I guess it would be very helpful for us if there were significant, I understand that some of the changes can be very minor, but if it was something significant, if we could have some more open notification. For example, the vehicle pursuit policy, and I don't know what some of these other ones,
Yeah.
you know. Go ahead.
That's absolutely correct. And that's where the space that we have been working in with the board. And I know that you were working very closely with DC Tate on the vehicle pursuit policy. And I know that before she left, she shared with you that we had a need to issue the updated policy because we were going live with the ALPR readers department wide, so that we had a need to go to issue that the update to 307, but that the conversation could continue around the other pieces that you were discussing around the vehicle pursuit policy. And in the same vein, the work that we're doing with the PAB around the body worn camera policy. Like we're going to move that along in partnership and collaboration with the PAB. But if we hit a point where we have to issue for some reason, whether it's a legislative change or something else that we may have to issue, that doesn't stop the conversation from happening and us continuing to collaborate and hear recommendations and ideas from the board.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the director? Thank you again, chief.
I have just a quick question. Director, did you mention when the council public safety committee meeting is?
I have not notified that there's a meeting date, but we are tracking it.
No, there's no meeting date at this time, but we're tracking.
And is your understanding the downtown task force report would be at that meeting, not postponed longer?
I can,
Next
yeah,
meeting?
they didn't make any clear indication, but I can follow up with the committee and see if that's gonna be agendas at the next one.
Because I think it's really important that, you, director, and possibly the chair, of the PAB be at that meeting, because that's a really, really important issue. And will determine what happens to the council, probably.
Thank you, board member Calvino. Is there anything else for ODPA staff? Looks like you guys are in the clear. Thank you very much. We'll take us to agenda item number 6, which is chair and board members report. I have not a report to share, but I do want to share some of my thoughts and feelings here, as this is my last meeting as chair. So after 2.5 years, I want to say it's been an honor and a privilege to serve with you as my colleagues. The work that we do is important. I thank you all for your service and what I've learned along the way from each and every one of you. So for that, I wanted to extend my gratitude, say thank you very much for the time that we spent together doing this work. And I look forward to helping continue in supporting this board and all the work it does. So that was what I wanted to share. Is there any other board member reports at this time?
Chair,
Yes.
you preside over the next meeting too, I believe.
Well, you know, I'm looking at it as half of the meeting. I want to preside over, and then I will gladly pass that gavel along.
Okay.
Well, I would just like to thank you for your service and really for your spirit.
Thank you very much.
I have really enjoyed getting to know you and working with you, and I feel like you always try to get us to a solution that everybody can feel comfortable with, even if we don't all agree. So I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Not saying or hearing any more blabbering, I am going to move us ahead to agenda item number 7. And that's the chief of police report. And that will take us to, Chief Lewis, how are we doing? Happy New
Good.
Year.
Happy New Year, good evening. So as I'm sure you can imagine and you experience, the end of the year is a pretty busy time, calendar year, as we start finalizing our year-end data, working through our analysis and looking at legislative changes. So speaking of legislative changes, earlier this evening, I sent for the board via the chair and the DPA, the 2025 legal and case law updates that went to all of our personnel. I did want to talk really briefly also about the statewide daylighting law that went into effect January 1st, 2025. So this is the law that requires motorists to park 20 feet away from the approaching side of an intersection. It's intended to increase visibility around intersections and support pedestrian safety, which we know is not only a department's one of the department's important goals, but also supports our city's Vision Zero work. So BPD will be implementing a grace period of local fines until April 1st. But in the meantime, our parking enforcement officers working with Public Works on painting curbs, but our parking enforcement officers will be putting informational flyers. So if they observe a vehicle that would have been ticketed, we'll place that on the car to help with education. There's also been some education efforts through city public information office. We will be pushing out additional community education efforts as we move towards April 1st. The other thing I did want to talk about was what we considered to be a very unusual circumstance, but the 6 shootings that our city experienced in the 12-day period to end our year, with the last one being on the 31st. So we're actively working through these investigations, obviously, but we're also leaning into our work with the city-led gun violence intervention and prevention program work. So there are locations with specific history that will be served very well by our partnerships, our city partnerships with both Live Free and ICHJR. So I'm really happy to report that we are actively standing up that program, and some of those resources have already been in place, and some of those outreach efforts have already occurred. I did want to talk a little bit about some of the data. So we looked at the data for our gunfire incidents in the city so that we can look at what our effective and appropriate responses are. Counting that one October South Campus incident where we had one person shoot at 6 different locations, counting that as one incident, we recorded 25 non-self-inflicted shootings in 2024. So that's is our lowest total since 2018. And that's 22% down from our 2023 figure, and half of the number that we saw in 2022. So, and that's looking at the shootings that occurred in our jurisdiction. So we did have a couple incidents that occurred at UC campus, Clark Kerr, and some freeway incidents. But looking at our Berkeley data, those were our numbers. We did note that roughly a third of the shootings that happened in our city resulted in an injury. With our city having 3 fatal shootings out of the 4 total homicides we had for last year, 3 of them were via shooting. So the other thing that's really interesting that we saw in our data was that we seized significantly more firearms in 2024 than we did in the year prior. So the year-end data indicates that we have right now is that 102 total guns were seized. And this occurs in a number of different ways. Some are calls for service where there's a weapon involved. Some are proactive patrol stops and investigative follow-ups. We have seized a number of guns via ALPR flock hits on a vehicle for it being a stolen vehicle, with a stop that ensues afterwards and a gun is recovered. One of those just happened earlier today. I do also want to call out, though, that there was a noticeable drop in crime across a lot of our major categories after that little bit of a spike that we saw in 2023. That's something that's being seen nationally. I think people are still looking at some of the reasons why for those changes. I can tell you from our city standpoint, some of the efforts that we've had in place have been really focused on addressing retail theft, addressing traffic safety. We also have leaned into our work around community engagement and problem solving through our Community Services Bureau. And as I said earlier, the partnerships that we have with our city-led GVIPP programs. So I think all of those have a positive impact on overall crime rates. But again, we recognize that there are a lot of factors that can drive and affect overall crime rates. So that's a little bit of the data that we've seen so far from 2024. Obviously, there's a lot of work to be done to pull that data together and verify and validate that data, but also do some analysis. And we are scheduled per our normal timing to do our annual report, prepare for our annual report in March of this year for council, which will absolutely be shared with the board and DPA as we're doing that. So happy to answer any questions at this time.
Hi, Chief. Thanks for being here. 2 questions. The first is about flock. I remember in a few meetings ago, actually, that you mentioned that the department might be looking into evaluating the flock program and figuring out different metrics for evaluation. Do you have an update on like any metrics that the department is using to report on the pilot project for flock?
Is the question what metrics we're going to use to validate the efficacy of the technology?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So I think we're so early in it. We're still learning what data we're going to receive. I can share that there was a recent San Francisco Chronicle article around the number of stops and arrests that resulted from ALPR flock technology, and there was a per capita data on the number of arrests that result. Our preliminary look at that, kind of looking at our data in the same way so we can compare it with other regional responses, was that we had a higher arrest rate from that the number of stops that we were making, looking at balancing out for the different populations. It'll be important to look at not only the overall crime trends, but also demographics and information around what we're seeing from the technology. What's very valuable about the use of flock technology versus other technologies is it removes the ability for bias as far as recognizing vehicles, that it's reporting on entered information around a stolen vehicle. And so officer bias is reduced because it's creating a step to get us to information based to make that stop. So I expect to see a lot of good data around that. But like I said, we're still exploring. We are coming up on a month of our first full rollout of this. And so our Office of Strategic Planning and Accountability will be starting to pull reports and look at that data and figure out what can we learn from it and how we can report it out. Expect that we'll be building out our transparency hub to report on a lot of that so that information is available. And there is a accessible on the Flock website, the ability to see the number of stops and things like that. But I want to make sure that one is really accessible to the public so that the same way they get to the hub, they get to that data. So it's a great question. We're still moving towards exactly how we're going to measure and how we're going to report that data.
Great, thanks. I assume that the board would be interested in periodic updates on that, so that'd be great if you have this in the future. The second question is about the early intervention system that we've been working on with you, and just curious if you had any updates on the process and where we're at in that process.
Yeah, that is slated to go to the January 21st council meeting for it's on the consent calendar for approval to enter into that contract with benchmark analysis. So we would, once we clear council approval on that day, we would be able to finalize the contracting process.
Great. Okay, thanks for your commitment to that.
Of course.
Any other questions at this time? Thank you very much, Chief. Have a
Thank
great
you.
night.
Good night.
Thank you. And that takes us to agenda number 8. Agenda item 8, subcommittee reports. Anything you wanna?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Chair. Went up to item number 8, subcommittee reports. This is the opportunity for subcommittees to report on their activities and any meetings scheduled in the upcoming days. I'll go ahead and go in order from our subcommittee list, which is on page 15 of the agenda packet, starting with the regulations subcommittee.
So, board member Lefkovich and I have been meeting with the negotiating team to get permanent regulations in place. We met on December 18th and again this morning. And progress is slowly being made. These last 2 meetings have been the first meetings with the union negotiator. And so it's slow, but we're moving.
Thank you.
Anything else? Board member Lefkovich?
Yeah. Yeah, one of the issues that's been important to us that we've discussed as a board before is whether complainants should have access to body worn camera footage. And I think we all feel very strongly that they should, and it's just a matter of due process and fairness. And so I wrote a memo to the city attorney's office because they've taken the position that as a matter of law, complainants are not permitted to have that access. So I just sent that over yesterday, I believe it was. It's all kind of a blur. And so we will see what the city attorney says in response to that. Also, the attorneys who are leading the negotiations got copies of it, and you all have received copies of it. It isn't public yet. Maybe it's, we're hopeful that those regulations will be adopted. And if not, I think we will urge the board to say that we need to go to city council on that issue because it's that important. And I don't think we'll see how things go, but I don't think there are a lot of issues with that we're stuck on that we would necessarily go to council, but we'll see.
Thank you for that update, Board Member Lefkovich.
Okay, up next is the fair and impartial policing implementation.
Nothing to report there, we're just waiting to see if the fair and partial policing report, it's been submitted as the director mentioned, again, to council and to the agenda and rules committee, and we're waiting to see if that too will be sent to the public safety committee.
Then the surveillance technology policy subcommittee.
Nothing on that.
Okay. Policies and practices relating to the downtown task force and bike unit allegations.
Still in limbo.
Yeah, that's have been sent by the agenda and rules committee to the public safety committee, and we will have representation there, I hope.
Conflict of interest subcommittee.
I believe we were talking about dissolving that subcommittee. I couldn't forget. I guess we were
Waiting.
holding off, but I'm not sure we really need to. I mean, I'm fine with keeping the subcommittee just to see what happens, but it's not, we're not doing anything actively at this point.
Okay. Then for policy complaint 2023 PR 0003.
Yeah.
Board Member Wilson, Vice Chair Wilson.
Yeah, thanks for all of your help, Jose, on that. I was able to get a draft over to the department, and I've asked for feedback by January 12th. And I also spoke to the complainant and shared my findings with her. And indicated that once I get the draft back from the department, I'll share the report with her before bringing it forward to the board. So it's moving along.
Okay.
My issue is.
What is it?
This is a policy complaint regarding the policies governing dispatch personnel. Allegations that they were rude or unprofessional, access to dispatch recordings, and any policies governing the call prioritization generally and property crimes in progress specifically.
Okay. Policy review subcommittee.
So, that policy, which we've been focusing on for quite a while now, is the vehicle pursuits policy. First, I see that we still have board member Moses on that subcommittee, but I believe that actually that you had decided to not kind of transfer the energy that you wanted to bring that to the operations and processes. Is that right? Or do you still want to?
No, that's right. Once, I felt like I did several, the in-person conversations, it seemed like it made sense.
Right, so you're not on the,
Exactly, yeah. no.
okay, yeah, so you can just take him, his name off. Thanks. Anything you want to say?
Yeah, there's two outstanding. I don't know, action items, I guess. The first is the request for the 187A forms, which is still outstanding, and we are discussing with the director what is feasible to process and with the department about what is feasible for them to process in order to find some sort of compromise. And on the second is the sort of charter requirement that we go to council once, if we have any disagreements. And we still do have at least one disagreement over pursuit intervention techniques, specifically pit maneuvers and the use of them, the authorization of them in Berkeley. And so we have been working on a memo that we will send to the department that we will eventually also send to city council if we cannot reach any sort of consensus on that specific issue. But otherwise, our work has been very productive with them.
Can you remind us what the 187A form is?
Yes, the CHP 187A forms are the forms that the departments must, or that an individual officer must submit to the state after a vehicle pursuit has been initiated, and it includes information like when the pursuit occurred, where it occurred, how the pursuit ended, what injuries occurred, was there any property damage? And this is submitted, I believe, every year. I mean, Lieutenant Reed and correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, or add any color if you want, because he's in the records department, but.
Well, the 187A forms were completed by the officer after the incident itself, and then the copy is sent to the CHP. It's the CHP form that we fill out.
It's a state requirement, right?
All right, I remember that.
And the reason that, you know, just as a reminder that the subcommittee wanted them was because it would help us understand the craft of the use of vehicle pursuits in Berkeley specifically, and the operation of different intervention techniques and their efficacy, and allow us to, you know, provide more informed and evidence-based recommendations, specifically to Berkeley. Oh, man.
I'll go with the budget and metrics up next, and I'll note that the list is outdated in terms of the members, still noting now council member Blackfeet, but the budget and metrics committee.
We haven't done anything. You know, I'm trying to talk about replace Blackfeet.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then outreach and engagement.
Nothing to report at this time, although I'm very excited about the office taking on social media.
Okay. Off-duty conduct subcommittee.
Nothing to report, although I might in the future recommend that we fold that into the policy subcommittee at some point, but just because it's both me and board member Lava try, and it only makes sense, but I'm gonna hold off on that until after, like, maybe into a future meeting.
Okay. Operations and processes.
Well, I'm slowly working through my proposed replacement of our standing rules. I got edits back from the director, working to incorporate those and also asked him to revise some of the information he gave me, so it's in the works, but it's slow.
Then I'll be honest, I'm holding the hostage, but I'm gonna get it back to you.
And then the BPD policy 1010 and 1030 peer review by Chair Moore and Board Member Webb.
No movement at this time.
What are those again?
Would you care to give the description of them?
Just one moment. Let me remind the policies real quick.
There's two.
Oh, which one? 1010.
So 1010 is the personnel complaints one. 1034.
Forget the exact name of it, but it's the
Oh,
complaint
complaints
review.
review, so they're interlinked and part of the or the origin, it was sort of a referral from our office when we did a policy review, that there was some room to synchronize some of the charter language and some of the regs with those two policies, because right now it's a little silent, so it's not as clear to the members of the public, and nor I don't even think to the police department officers. I don't want to speak for them, but it really focuses more on the internal process of the BPD without necessarily recognizing some of the nuances of the charter in there.
Okay. And then moving on to our liaison list, Board Member Cayetano.
We heard that from the chief, January 21st, I believe. is the date.
Okay. And for policy reviews assigned to board members, Chair Moore. Devon?
Not at this time.
Okay, perfect. And with that, we conclude subcommittee reports.
Thank you, Jose. And that will take us to agenda item number 9, new business, and A. Discussion action on new policy of 2024 PR 008 in accordance with section G. Policy complaints and reviews of the PAB standing rules. Director.
Yes, Mr. Chair, we did notify the policy complainant. They have indicated they're unavailable today. So we wanted to bring that to your attention to see if you wanted to table it or if you wanted to continue with the presentation and make a decision on what you have before you, and we'll tell you shortly.
I'm gonna open it up to my colleague. Is there any preference that we either tackle this now or table it to the next meeting and have a more robust and, I guess, fluid discussion at that point, or do we wanna?
Well, it's pretty simple one, so I feel like we can come forward today.
All right.
So again, as we noted, the complainant isn't here today and won't be able to attend. But we still allow for public comment if anybody has any comments regards to item 9A of the policy review before we proceed a quick recap. Board member questions.
What page is it on?
And the material is on page 18 of the agenda packet. Okay, Chair, I see no hands raised on behalf of members of the public. Guess just for the purpose of efficiency, if there's any aspect of the complaint that the board would like us to address?
I just had a quick question slash comment.
Yes.
And maybe it's about the term roster. Because I'm kind of astounded if in fact the department, I mean, if it's a roster, again, I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I'd be astounded if they didn't know the identity of all past officers going way back, so I'm a little surprised by the department's response that they don't have that information. But again, maybe it's just the term roster.
We would, if that's a question for us, we'd like to yield to Lieutenant Reed or somebody from our department to clarify that. The records regarding the BPD rosters or personnel list.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the term of personnel rosters. I think they need more context of what they're asking for.
And then the PRA request is on page 25.
And that's what it is.
Maybe it should have just been identities of the officers.
So if
Well-
I'm asking for the name of that number of
Yeah.
people in those years.
Yeah.
I think we should accept this policy complaint and so option number 2. Is accept the policy complaint and direct the staff to carry out an investigation. What they were asking for was the names and badge numbers of officers from 2012 to 2018. And I would also like to include in that policy review some discussion of the language of the response, because the response was, we have completed this request and basically given what we asked for, but it struck me as the response to this was, it struck me odd, since they were not able to complete their. Anyway,
Board Member Kelly, I believe you made a motion.
I did.
Can I get a
made the
second?
motion that we accept it and ask the staff to investigate.
Excellent. Can I get a second to that?
Sure. So before we vote, I would just like to share my perspective. I think it is, obviously, I think it's something the department should be able to provide. But when I say obviously, I think it depends on what kind of, ERP, like electronic record system they have for personnel. All organizations are different in that regard. But what I'm always, considering is the overall inventory of outstanding policy, reviews that are existing. And so because I really don't have a lot of clarity or visibility into that, but my sense is there are a number, and some of which have been, outstanding for quite some time. And there are many meetings where we add to that list, at the recommendation of staff or otherwise. And I think it's important that we maintain some cognizance of what our backlog is and how long we are taking to actually get through these. So I have to prioritize this particular complaint. I don't see as the one that would be a high priority. I would instead suggest perhaps that we note it as an issue, and as we collect future complaints regarding PRA, and I will raise here that the policy complaint I'm reviewing also ties to a PRA issue, that at some point we take on as an initiative looking at the PRA issue in its entirety with respect to the department. Like, it looks like an updated retention schedule has been pending for some time. That's probably important for us to look into and adjust. There are probably many omissions to that schedule, not just this one. We might want to look at that, but I would suggest holding off on this, cataloging it, and then taking a look at a future date at the broader issue of Public Records Act requests in the department's existing policy on that front. That would be my alternative suggestion.
Yeah, I agree with the concern about the number of outstanding policy reviews and the need to prioritize them, because this seems unreasonable, but is it, how much of a priority should it be given? I think in the past, you have provided us with a list of all the outstanding complaints and the status. So maybe that would be helpful to get, on a regular basis. And if you want input from the board about prioritization, I'm sure we'd be happy to provide that.
So there was a second, so we have to go ahead and make this vote.
Could I just respond? I appreciate that. You need to prioritize. At the same time, I think this is low hanging fruit, and this will not take very long at all. This is a quick one to respond to a member of the public who is concerned about this. And I feel strongly that we ought to go ahead and respond to this policy complaint. I assume it won't take a lot of staff time. And so that would be, yeah, I agree that there are a lot of policy. Some of them are very complex and are taking a long time. This one is probably not that complicated. And I think it's important to respond to the public.
Jose, let's go ahead and get this vote on.
Okay, so on the motion to accept the policy complaint and direct ODPA staff to carry out the review, I'll start with Board Member Calavita,
Yes.
Board Member Cayetano,
Yeah, so if we understand that, we can also, in the future, follow Board Member Wilson's,
okay, Board Member Leftwich,
Yes.
Chair Moore,
Yes.
Board Member Moses,
Yes.
and Vice Chair Wilson.
No. And I would ask that in future items that come forward on the policy review front, if staff could maybe just at the bottom or in your recommendation section, include the number of outstanding policy reviews and the duration of their pendency. That would be helpful for us if we consider taking on new ones.
We know that.
Okay, and then Board Member Williams is absent, the motion carries 5 yeses, 1 noes.
And so that takes us to 9G, discussion and action regarding the presentation, policy review 2023 PR, government power 777, part 007, part 1, enforcement of restraining orders. And I will leave it on to you, Director. I believe, Jose?
Just a little quick introduction, per the approval from last meeting, we were able to separate the policy complaint into 2 parts. So we have completed the first part, that's what we're presenting today, and Jose will go over, our policy analyst go over, get into the weeds of that first part of it.
Just 1 moment, slightly new setup for me. Perfect. Okay, so just need to move this to the corner up here. And we should be fine. Okay.
And just, can you go to the next one? We just want to see if you're comfortable with the size of the font. We could also turn a projector if need be.
It's so cool, it's so cool.
Can't read it at all, but that's okay.
All right,
Quick fix.
we'll set that up.
I guess it's always helpful, my preference is to have something in front of me that I can read as opposed to my phone.
We'll include it in the packet next time.
Okay, so while we get that projector running, just a quick background as to of this policy complaint. The complainant and her neighbor's caretaker have been involved in a multi-year dispute. As a result of this dispute, there have been allegations of disturbances, harassments, and hostile behavior on behalf of her neighbor's caretaker towards the complainant. The complainant has reported that there's been property damage, including severe vandalism of her vehicle, as well as verbal and physical assaults that she has reported. As a result of these incidents, she's filed multiple restraining orders, including one that was at the time filed on June 6, 2023 for elder abuse with no exceptions. And she was also issued a notice of covenant against the caretaker, which means that essentially the caretaker, based on the HOA's rules, wasn't welcomed on the property. The complainant alleges that some of the failures of BPD include perceived negligence of enforcing the restraining order. Officers allegedly misunderstood or dismissed the terms of the restraining order, treating the caretaker as being exempt. The complainant's concerns here is that she reports feeling unprotected and ignored by the BPD and alleges inadequate response and discriminatory treatment, which would be something that we would discuss more in our second portion of our report. The objective of this particular part of the report is to examine the concerns raised by the complainant regarding challenges in enforcing her restraining order, identifying any issues such as the inconsistencies in interpretation and application by officers, and highlighting the need for clear communication and improved training if needed. Sorry, you set up. In terms of how we approach this review, we did apply a mixed method approach, not only just accessing the qualitative data that was available through the various reports and documents provided both by the complainant and through previous personnel complaint, but also reviewing it from a data qualitative perspective, in the sense of looking at calls for service data and seeing what the different outcomes were for different calls for services regarding restraining orders. We interviewed the complainant specifically in the context of this policy complaint, as well as reviewed prior statements. In total, as part of the incident review, we looked at 7 different reports written by BPD officers in regards to response to calls for service. And the data set that we looked for particularly was from the start of 2019 up until December 31st of last year. The policy that we focused this review on, it's a bit small, but we just wanted to put that in there when we printed the packets. It's particularly policy 430.4 court orders, which is a part of policy 430, which is under civil disputes. This policy outlines the procedures for handling disputes, particularly around court orders, and provides guidance for officers on just overall when to arrest and the information that should become communicated to the community member in terms of whether, whether immediate action is required for enforcement. This policy, as it's written, is actually not unique to the Berkeley Police Department. It is from Lexipol. We looked into the 5 jurisdictions that were compared in the Citygate report. Of those 5 jurisdictions, Concord, Richmond, Fremont, and Santa Clara all have the exact same text in their policy. So, brief overview of the incident and just general analysis. In terms of the complaint's allegation, the BPD again claimed that the BPD failed to enforce the restraining order after multiple calls for service, alleging officers acted unilaterally and violated the court order by not enforcing it, specifically by not arresting the restrained party. Our review of the different incident reports, as well as other relevant case material that was available to us, showed that officers attempted to contact the restrained party on multiple occasions, but found no evidence or were unsuccessful in making contact. And in some instances, there was no evidence that the allegations had occurred, meaning that there's no probable cause for an arrest. And there were 2 instances where the complainant had presented enough evidence, even though the individual wasn't on the scene, where there could have been probable cause, and those incidents were forwarded to the district's attorney's office for review. As part of a review, one of the things that we noticed was that there appeared to be a gap of information between what the complainant had received and what was actually done by officers. For example, the DA enforcement aspect wasn't readily known to the complainant, and she wasn't aware of the standard for an arrest, which, given the context and what she had experienced, she was expecting an arrest for the alleged allegations, which wasn't going to be possible given the circumstances observed by officers and the evidence that they had at that time. And again, we apologize, that's a little bit smaller, future consideration for font in the next slide. But again, in our review of BPD policy and the overall adherence, we found that in this specific set of incidents, BPD policy adhered not only just to the policy as it's written in their lexical manual, but also what's required of Penal Code 836C1. They documented the incidents and forwarded potential violations to the district's attorney's office, as well as they evaluated the terms of the restraining order carefully and determined, again, based on the evidence that was available to them, that the restrained party's actions did not violate the order's provisions. Officers had made multiple attempts to contact the restrained party, including knocking on the door, leaving business cards, but based on available evidence, there wasn't the cause for them to arrest. And again, in 2 instances, they did forward to the district's attorney's office for review the incident and the allegations. In terms of the statistical context, since 2019, the BPD, as reported in their transparency hub, have made 376, have responded to 376 restraining order violations. Of those violations, only 13 or 3.5% actually resulted in an arrest, while 96.5% of those cases resulted in incident reports, MDT or CAD narratives, or a stop data entry, suggesting BPD generally handles violations without an arrest, or at least the response doesn't result in an arrest. In terms of the policy and the legal alignments, the lexical policy is in alignment with state law. And this particular aspect in which the complainant essentially was expecting an arrest, the policy and the state law state that an arrest is only possible when there's probable cause to believe that the restraining order was violated, or there's a danger to an immediate danger to the restrained party that would require additional action. As we noted, while BPD policy includes informing the reporting party about potentially short custody times for arrested individuals, it lacks guidance on communications to the complainant or the responding party as to why an arrest wasn't made. In this case, the complainant didn't have that information, which she perceived to be inaction on behalf of the department. As a review of the circumstances of this policy complaint and the available policy, we came up with 3 recommendations. The first is to enhance public education and transparency. One aspect that we noticed that on BP's website, there isn't a lot of resources regarding restraining orders, which was something that we observed other departments to have. One good example that I know here, and it's super tiny to see, but there's a lot of information on it, is the Seattle Police Department that not only provides resources to their internal policies and their internal resources, but also at the county level, they provide different resources such as 24-hour call lines, where the reporting party can ask questions to individuals whether something is a violation of the restraining order, what their rights are under certain situations, and overall just gather more resources in case they need to move somewhere, and things of that nature. Oh, that is not what I needed there. Hold on. Sorry about that brief disruption and
What should I say? Switch it. Okay.
Back to the last slide. Okay, so where I was at, the second recommendation is just improved communications with reporting parties. And part of this, that what we noticed in the policy is that the lexical language that's included in section 430.3 doesn't know what information should be communicated in this case. So our recommendation is that officers should be provided clear guidance on how to communicate decisions regarding arrest or non-arrest to reporting parties. And this is to ensure that reporting parties are fully informed about the enforcement process, the reasoning behind the decisions made, and any developments in their case, reducing misunderstanding or confusion. And then the last one is to adopt successful strategies from other jurisdictions. As I mentioned, the Seattle Police Department has a great resource page, but other jurisdictions have also incorporated a lot of different resources. Some are a little bit more condensed, but tailored to the specific needs of their communities. Some of the strategies that we referenced in our report include the Los Angeles Police Department, San Diego Police Department, and the Seattle Police, which include within their website sections like the frequently asked questions about restraining orders, different community resources to help bridge the public's understanding of what restraining orders are and what their limitation is, and the role of law enforcement in those interactions. And overall, I believe, based on the research that we did, that including these resources would help improve transparency and foster stronger trust within the Berkeley community. And that's just a brief overview of our report. For part one of this.
Thank you, Jose. Thank you, PA staff. That was great report.
We'll take any questions.
Thank you so much for doing this, a lot of work. So I have a couple of questions. One is, I noticed that the law makes an exception for workplaces, that a restrained person doesn't have to avoid the other person as long as they have to. But I seem to remember in this case that, so this individual who was restrained was a caretaker for somebody in the complex. And I seem to remember that the parking lot was extensive, and yet the individual parked under the complainant's window. Is there anything in the policy, or could there be something in the policy which requires that the restrained individual take all precautions not to, like is that workplace exception open-ended? So that if it's at a workplace, the person needs to make no attempt to avoid getting near the person?
So that question seems to me to be less of a police practice policy question and more of a legal court order question.
Putting it in the policy.
Enforce limitations on a court order. The court issue.
It says the limitation so much as a
policy wouldn't have power over a citizen's movements in the same way that court order does.
So in other words, so the law is such that if a workplace is involved, basically there is no restraint.
No, I'm not gonna, I don't know the nuances of it, but a policy cannot modify a court order. So like if the court order doesn't have any more stuff than in it, we can't do it in a policy.
Okay, so my second question is, when we did the downtown task force report, there was a lot of discussion of stay away orders. I believe that stay away orders are part of these restraining orders. Is that correct? In other words, the statistics, the 376 calls for service, does that include stay away orders, or are they only restraints against individuals?
For this particular report, they're only restraints against individuals. The stay away orders are, when they're put into the data system, they're actually categorized as court orders, versus these are more detailed restraining orders, which also differentiates domestic violence calls in that regard. So these are very specific to restraining orders.
Yeah, I have two things. The first is on your recommendations, and the second is more on your how you did the investigation. So for the recommendations, do you think it's possible, maybe desirable even, if the director's office published a website that would have that sort of information in conjunction with the department, or are you hoping that the department would put it on their website?
What specific information are you?
Yeah, the one about how restraining orders operate and
FAQs.
We're happy to, if that's the most appropriate place. One of the things I've been mentioning for a while now, is that we don't believe in this current format, the city's layout of a website is very restrictive. So, we would definitely, we're in the process of looking to a different standalone website, but if you believe as a body that it makes more sense for us to house it, we can do it. The department also, we have seen, they provide referrals and resources, like ACLU. So it is something, I think we can both do or collaborate. I don't know that there'll be any issue.
them to do, and you know, if it's easier for us to do it, then it provides the same public function, right? But if they're willing to collaborate, then that's even better, right? And if they can. So and the second question was about all these findings that you made. Where did you get all these, you know, 376 calls for service numbers, where did the 25%, where did you get all the data for that?
The data was on the transparency hub. That's data that we pulled from the call for service.
Was there any data that you wish you had, you weren't able to find on there?
I think my ideal data set in this one would have regarded more specific descriptions of the other incidents. More in the sense of, was this just the restraining order from a particular location or a different group of employees, versus this is a particular restraining order against an individual. I think that would have been nice to know. It would have strengthened the data analysis to go a little bit further.
All right, thank you for your.
Am I correct that the lack of evidence that you reference is they couldn't prove that the individual was in the building?
That's correct.
Is there any clarity as to when discovery of that evidence is necessary, or where the supplying of that evidence is sufficient on the part of the complainant? My point being that, you know, they never got past the door.
Mhm.
So is the scenario here that in order to avoid this restraining order, they just didn't have to answer the police knocking?
I'm trying to track the question. So
My understanding is that the complainant says this individual is in this building.
Right.
I also think that when it said, I don't think this individual is actually providing care to anybody, that person isn't there. So there's no way to verify and no attempt to verify either of those facts, as far as I can tell.
So in terms of the second aspect of the question, in one report, the officers did mention that they had received proof from IHSS in the form of a pay stub that the caretaker was in fact the caretaker for this individual. And as part of that restraining order process, they also testified in court that they were a caretaker. And sorry, when I mean they, I mean to the person that was receiving the care testified in court that this in fact was a caretaker.
Oh, okay, gotcha, okay, so that second part was very missing. Okay, I mean, it sounds to me like it is a scenario of issue with the law, not necessarily law enforcement, is that sort of?
I did one of the things, there is that element, but the other element of it is the customer service and
Right.
transparency element of this. I think if the complainant was able to see what we were able to see in some regards, back to the body worn camera, you would see these attempts. And that information isn't always fully communicated, so the complainants are left to believe nothing's being done.
Right. I think even if the complainant saw that the officer was knocking on the door. And again, the complainant says, I saw them go in 10 minutes ago. I know they're in there. The officers arrive, they knock on the door, nobody answers, they leave. That happens 5 times. I don't care how much body worn camera footage I see. The feeling is, why aren't you breaking the door down? I know that they're in there, right? And it sounds like that is a law issue, not a law enforcement.
That's correct.
Can I just clarify, because I have a hard time reading this, but, like, what is actually the policy complaint or the issue? One is, like, elder abuse, the department doesn't know how to enforce, elder abuse restraining orders, I guess. Some of it is that these officers were rude, right, or like, that's like a person, there's a lot of, personnel complaint issues interwoven with this. I'm struggling to get at the policy issue. It's that the policy doesn't adequately address, how to enforce a restraining order. That's what you would sum up as the policy complaint.
I think, again, the broader scope here was policy, practice, procedure. So the policy may say one thing, she, in her interpretation, the complainant felt that the practice was inconsistent with what the policy said. So there was that element. That's why the data analysis helped us get a broader picture. So it wasn't strictly just policy. It was practices.
Okay. And practices that don't lead over into an individual personnel complaint.
They were,
Like it's just a general practice of all officers.
right, so it originated from the personal experience and the individual believes that the department as a whole is in violation or there's a deviation from the policy.
Do you want us to, vote or say something specific about the recommendation here?
It's at the board's discretion whether they want to accept the recommendations as is. If there's any changes you would like to make to those, or if there's any additional questions you would like us to address, as part of the report.
We need to go over the recommendations quickly. Are we all clear with that?
So that ask you, a new webpage that the department would create, work for Higher Town was suggesting perhaps ODPA created.
Or there's a
Or
collaboration?
there's a collaboration. And then to host these informational workshops, is that a recommendation as well?
It's a suggestion in the sense as part of what that could look like. As part of that recommendation as a whole about community outreach.
And to be clear, most of the neighbors around here have a frequently asked questions page about protective orders and the different type of orders and the frequently asked questions about.
There are, as I noted, there are some jurisdictions that do a good job at it. I did know, or I would note that, for example, Oakland only really has their policy up. And even then, their version of it's very hard to access it. The only, or I'd say the more prominent resource that's currently available is the Alameda County Court's website. But their focus is more on how do you actually file it, not so much of the what comes next after it's been filed.
So these jurisdictions that are cited are much larger than Berkeley, you know, presumably have more resource. As part of that metric subcommittee, and you'll see in my policy complaint, you know, we're suggesting that we pick comparable jurisdictions and kind of stick to them. They are, and I recommend using and drawing from the Citygate report. They're a lot smaller than these. I don't know what they have. This seems, I think it sounds like a best set of best practices recommendations. It also sounds like a lot of resource. that would be required to do it. And I don't think just saying like another strategy would be to do this is really clear enough of, is that actually a recommendation that we're voting on? So I think we should be clear about what we're voting on. If we're voting to recommend that the department establish a webpage with FAQs, then we should like clearly vote on that. Period. If we're voting on do informational sessions, then we should vote on that. That's my point.
I'm in favor of the webpage, not so much the informational sessions, just from a resource standpoint. Just don't think that, I think people who have restraining orders and who know what restraining orders are would be the most likely people to attend that. People who don't know what they are not really attend that because people tend not to, care about that until they are faced with that issue. So it might not be as effective in that sense versus the webpage where people can go when they need it. So I would just move that staff look into collaborating with the department first, and if the department, kicks it back to staff, and then the department, or then the director's office builds that webpage, addressing the recommendations in the memo. And it's not do that's only for that, yeah.
Okay.
A second one.
Can you remind me what the motion was?
Yeah, it's just to accept staff's recommendation to build out an FAQ webpage, either with the department or on its own. It's a better way of putting it.
I'll now proceed to the roll call vote. Board Member Calavita,
Yes.
Board Member Cayetano,
Yes.
Board Member Leftwich,
Yes.
Chair Moore,
Yes.
Board Member Moses.
Yes.
And Vice Chair Wilson.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Can I ask one other kind of big picture question? Do we have a document that contains all the recommendations that we've made to the department?
Yes, and that's something that we had attempted to put in the last annual report. We unfortunately ran out of time, but that is something we'd like to put. And we had a recommendations matrix in other jurisdictions, like in Fairfax County. We tracked it out when we made it, department's response and the implementation, similar to what Dr. Redondo does with the reimagined public safety stuff. But that, I think you brought up is very timely. We could definitely.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
Special revenues review, the reports go after you present them to us.
We forward them to the department based on the vote of the board and just give an introductory note. So
A typo on page 45. Second line under incident review and analysis. With their remaining order against their neighbor. I think we, like, their neighbor's caretaker. Right?
Yes, let me just.
yes,
All the way down under incident review and analysis for students.
Incident review and analysis, line 2.
right. That's accurate. It says against the, yes.
Yeah.
Are we comfortable reading there? All right. So with that, let's go to new business, item 1C, designation of a presented before the PAB report to city council. I'm gonna say that was me reading the little type of it. Berkeley Police Department takes offense, an independent investigation by police accountability.
Yes, so as we mentioned earlier tonight, the city council's rules and agenda committee has forwarded to public safety So that's where it currently is. They, based on the website, they meet the third Monday of the month, but, I don't wanna, necessarily stick to that date until we get confirmation. That'll be the next date. That being said, though, it is helpful to have a designated liaison or representative from the PAB to be able to speak on behalf of the body. It could be the chair, or it could be somebody that worked closely on this, and definitely would be helpful at the Public Safety Committee as well, to help us field those questions.
So, we're talking about when it's presented to council, not when it's presented to the committee.
I think both. I mean, I don't know if you have you believe it should be two different people and based on availability or not, but
The chair should, be there, and possibly the chair of the committee, which in that case is me. It is the third Monday of January, I won't be in town, so. But I would like to be part of the presentation to council when it goes to council, and I think it should be the director chair of the meeting. That would be my motion in terms of presentation to council. When it goes to the committee, I would say the chair and the director.
Thoughts?
You will be chair, then. So I support that. It's the 20th,
Oh, that's the 20th?
yeah.
Oh, the 20th, I'm not out of town yet. Okay.
That's perfect. The chair ends the subcommittee.
Sounds like they're playing.
The gift that keeps on giving, let me tell you about this guy. Sure, I think that's a great
So
idea.
that's the public safety, January 20th?
Yeah.
20th?
tentatively,
Is it January 20th?
That's not the
That's an okay day, so
Yeah,
Oh.
it
I
can be.
think they're gonna probably reschedule it. I don't,
Yeah,
the agenda hasn't been
I
posted,
think that's
so.
not the third Monday, the 20th. And the third Monday.
But it's,
but it's MLK.
it's so,
so they're gonna have to reschedule. Okay, well,
okay, so that's a floating date, that's
Okay,
gonna keep it saucy, we'll just
so
have to see what happens.
it'll be the chair. And I think the director, are you in agreement that you should be there?
Yes, I think it might be helpful.
Yeah, the director, the chair, and me.
I'm gonna second that.
I do have to do a roll call though, for this particular motion. Board Member Calavita,
Yes.
Board Member Cayetano,
yes.
Board Member Leftwich,
Yes.
Chairman Moore,
Yes.
Board Member Moses.
Yes.
And Vice Chair Wilson.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so that's the downtown task force report.
And does that both for committee and committee?
Pretty much.
Yes.
That's the same.
Okay. Then the FIP report, that one has been submitted to the clerk for the council meeting on February 11th. We'll have to confirm with the agenda rules whether it'll be noted for that meeting. Currently. Thought I had it. One moment, what, get that item.
Oh, do we need that for a vote?
No. Okay. So
So that will take us to 9D, are we comfortable with that?
Sorry, we didn't get a motion.
Oh, I thought we, seconded,
FIP report.
So that is being sent to council in February.
That has been sent to council for the February
11th.
11th meeting, so it's still gonna go to the rules and agenda first, and they'll decide if they're gonna keep it for that.
Okay, I propose that we put off this item until, our next meeting.
Okay, and we'll have time soon, so.
Uh,
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, yeah. So we got a motion on the floor.
Okay, exactly.
Okay. Are there any objections to tabling the item?
Not saying how
Okay. We can now go to item 9D, Chair, when you're ready.
that's perfect. The presentation, the proposed outline for the PAB and OBBA's 2024 annual report.
Thank you, Chair. This item is on page 65. So, as I mentioned earlier, we've been in conversation over the break, with the vice chair. And board member Rose is also gonna be the liaison to us, as you guys have assigned, both of them to work in making sure that we, this annual for it. That we get the annual report in sync and avoid some of the streamlined process, based on what we learned last time. So they are charter required, activity that needs to be reported out. So we outlined what that would look like. And we have a tentative timeline, based on our conversation and what the deliverables will be. So, this is something we're gonna keep continuing to develop and stay on track of. You see, January 22nd, we'll have prepared a more detailed outline. We're gonna run it by the vice chair and the board member on the agenda if approved. And then March 25, you heard the chief today, that she's going to be submitting it to their annual report to council in March. So we're just finalizing it around that time, our report, and then we can aim to present it to council in April.
Questions. So what time period does this cover? So
This is just 1 year, this
Calendar
back to
year.
annual year.
calendar year?
Calendar year,
Okay.
yes.
I mean, April to me seems a little late. I don't know if there's any way to do it sooner than that, but I also note that later on when we have discussion about, different public outreach events and, the proposal was to present the annual report to the public sometime between July and September. And that just seems so late to be, if you know, September, talking about the prior year, we're almost into the next year. So, I mean, that's, anyway, so one suggestion, if at all possible, would be to do it sooner. That might not be possible. And then the other thing is I see number 10 is recommendations. And that just seems, obviously, I don't know what the recommendations are gonna be at this point, but it seems kind of might be a little buried in the report if our recommendations don't come until the very end. So, again, I haven't seen the report, don't know what's gonna be in it, but my thought might be to bump the recommendations up, because sometimes people don't, don't read the whole thing, if they're very end, they might not get to them.
And we can work with the liaisons to reorganize it a little bit more before we present it. And in terms of the presenting it, at least a draft form, we still have to build in the city attorney's review. So that's why that's probably a realistic time frame.
I have a couple of questions and suggestions. Under training and education, first of all, I think the summary of training and education initiatives ought to come later, but I don't understand description of any early warning systems utilized by the department. Why is that there?
That's charter language.
Well, that's in our annual report, the description of their early warning system.
Yeah.
That's very odd.
And why is that under training and education?
It doesn't really belong in training and education, and I don't feel like it belongs in the report. These maybe put it somewhere else.
Yeah, so it's 16B 3. In the language, there's training and education and any early warning system utilized by the department.
This needs to go in our annual report.
That's, yeah, and so 16, section 16 of the charter, is board reports. And 16B, it's where it starts providing the guidance.
Yeah, so it just, okay. More importantly, it seems to me that the description of the board's activities is really the substance of this report. And that we don't have to shortchange ourselves. I think we need to, and also not, make it broader than just complaints, be they personnel complaints or policy complaints. So I think we ought to talk about the downtown task force report, the very impartial policing report, various policies that we've examined. I mean, I think this is the substance of the report, and it ought not to be just a small section that's equal to the training and education section, for example. I mean, I think that really needs to be beefed up. And the trends and patterns and stops maybe should come sooner. Anyway, some reorganization along those lines.
I know we met on this, but I didn't have a chance to review this after we met and before it was posted for today. I don't remember a discussion about anything that's here in number 9. This comparison with other jurisdictions, is that, so forgive me if that was my idea, I totally forgot. Hopefully it was not, but, I'm just wondering if an annual report, which is a representation of what we've done in our accomplishments, is the right place for a comparative analysis. So.
Yeah.
Sorry, so the question was whether that was part of the conversation. I was gonna wait to see if you liked it and say, sure, it was yours. But since you don't like it, I'll be honest, I put that in there. I do believe that there's some benefit about having a broader discussion about where we are. If you don't like it, it doesn't have to go there. But I think sometimes council and the public at large doesn't know necessarily how this relates to the bigger oversight picture. So that was kind of what we were getting at.
So what would you say though? Would you say in Oakland, they considered 20 complaints? I mean, if you're comparing the prior year, you'd have to then know what their prior year looked like too, right?
Yeah, so again, I don't know that at this stage it was gonna be, it was an idea which I think would be beneficial to talk about. Let's talk about LPR, for example. With our city adopted it, other Bay Area jurisdictions have it. Some of the other Bay Area jurisdictions also have civilian oversight models. Did they engage in the same way we did? Did they make recommendations? So kind of making that bigger picture there. But again, if it doesn't feel like a right fit for this report, then we don't have to include it.
The ALPR is a good example. We have spent a lot of time on some of these things, and I think that the public and council needs to know that we're not just about responding to complaints. So really beef up the section on activities.
Right.
Just a small comment, I guess. Well, the first is that I didn't, and I might have missed it. Is there a section on the policies that we've reviewed and those outcomes?
Yes, that's under board activities, policy complaints that are taken.
What number is that?
3.
Great. Okay. That's helpful. I think it should also include the challenges that we've had in terms of data access. So that's the first thing. I'm glad it's on there. The second is, I didn't know that we had to report on early warning system, but maybe I can work with you on writing the update on that, since I was very intimately involved in the transition so far, which took all of 2024 actually. So might be a good part of it.
You got to start to finish in 1 year.
It did, I was, yeah, but I'm hopeful that I can help you with that, section in particular.
So one way to fold that into the report without making it look like it's just hanging there is to fold it into our activities.
Yeah,
So,
Yes.
with the other one.
so people spend a lot of quite a time, or spend a lot of time on that. That's an important activity, and in saying so, we can talk about the department policy.
Yeah. I think what that point emphasizes is it doesn't need to be a standalone category, just because the charter says identifies it as a category. We worked on it in other settings and we can highlight it under our activities, because we have worked on it.
I also think it might be helpful just to have a section called challenges. Just to highlight what we feel our challenges have been and continue to be, whether it's data or, you know, whatever.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, one final thing, put in there the work on regulations as an activity. We're doing a lot of things that people need to know.
That being said, is that our last, thought or addition I would like to make as a board? If so, I'm gonna go ahead and move us forward to the LDBA presentation of the preliminary 2025 calendar run minutes.
Okay, yeah, I'll make an emphasis that this is preliminary. We wanted to get something in writing and to your attention as you're going to soon meet regarding your work plan to see what we are endeavoring to do for this year. Some of these conversations are already taking place. Need to meet with the executive director of Healthy Black Families to try to partner for Black History Month event, which we're right around the corner. So very ambitious, but we're trying to do something transformative and start the conversation in a meaningful way. We recognize from our office perspective, we haven't been as proactive as we'd like to have been. We were building up the office and physically getting to this place we wanted to. So now we have the space and want to collaborate with the community and community partners. So a lot of this work is underway, and we do have some partnerships. Again, nothing that you see here is set in stone, but it is a sort of outline and framework we would like to follow and endeavor to execute this year.
It looks really good. I propose we have a booth at the Salon Store. That's a very visible event.
And as I had mentioned earlier, I just think that a presentation and getting community feedback on the annual report, I would have that sooner rather than waiting until July to September.
And I agree. I think one of the concerns we're trying to be sensitive about there, just a quick note, board member Cayetano, as a student advocate at the time, wanted to make sure that we didn't lose the student audience. In recognition of that, we were trying to, well, that one, like you said, it comes a little bit late. But we were trying to see if we do it like in September, the student population, but that's not to say there's only one segment of the population, so we could do several events, I think.
And he's not a student anymore, so
Right.
he doesn't care.
That's speaking. No pressure.
But your point is taken.
Do we need to vote on this or anything? We don't.
No.
Okay.
We're just taking a look, right?
Okay.
Yes.
So that's gonna take us to our next agenda item. I believe is 9F, discussion and action on establishing a mutual aid agreement subcommittee as required by section K. Mutual aid agreements, the PAB standing rules. I can see Vice Chair already. Let's start the conversation, Director.
Sure, and I'm gonna yield shortly to our policy analyst, but this is where I think we need to come to terms with interpretation here. The charter says it provides you the authority to do this, but then your standing rules say if you do it, you gotta stand up your subcommittee by no later than this date. So that's where we wanted to flag it to your attention and to see what your interpretation is gonna be part of your work plan, and you should start getting, started on a subcommittee, but I'll yield to our policy analyst.
Okay, thank you, Director. As we noted in our memo, and as the Director just mentioned, one of the powers of the board, or rather, one of the power/duties is outlined in the charter, but not explicitly differentiated, is that the board can review all agreements, letters, memorandum of understanding, or policies outlining the terms and conditions of mutual aid, and so forth. The section that I'm referencing for members of the public is section 125, 3A2 for members of the public. As part of that process, or at least in terms of our reading of the standing rules and the as they stand in the charter, section A was adopted. We're essentially said that the board shall establish a subcommittee to review/determine what agreements the board wanted to take on or provide feedback to the BPD on. So with that said, we bring this because again, there is a deadline attached that goes on that has to be done before the first February meeting, if I remember correctly.
February 1st.
Right, to make that decision whether or not the MOUs want to be revisited, or the board's approach, or rather for the board to decide how they want to approach this.
So an annual review to me sounds really excessive. Obviously, we need to do this at some point, but I don't think we need to do it every year. I don't think we have the bandwidth to do that. But if we have that as part of our standing rules, I think we need to change our standing rules, and I think that's something that you're looking at.
I am, but I'm wondering if, because it's been a long process, if in the interim, could we just vote to amend this particular provision? Or eliminate it in our current standing rules? You know, while you're waiting to get this tone that I'm producing with the director, could we just do that? Because we are not in compliance, we have not been in compliance.
Let me interject here, and from my experience here on this board, when we're talking about transparency and accountability, this is one of the most, I'd say, important parts of what we do as a body to make sure that, and especially in the time of Trump, that if we don't look at these MOUs and these outside agreements we're making with other policing bodies, we could be holding our communities when they could have support from our board, where we're just leaving them out. And I don't feel comfortable with that. I think this is something that we weren't able to do in the past prior years because there was issues with regulations, with access, and even working together with the department. I've asked for these for years. So that being said, I feel like this is an important part of our duty. This is not a will thing, but it is written as shall. In the language I have, I've asked multiple times for MOUs with other agencies and departments, and we've been waiting patiently for.
We've gotten a set, it's just they're not
They're not
all current.
they're not current.
And maybe they aren't, but we don't know if they're current.
Well, we've asked if they're current MOUs, and we're waiting for that response as well. So I don't think this is something that is every other kind of year thing, especially in the next 4 years that we're going to be having. When we look at ICE, when we look at different agencies, we have we see all of those agreements. And as a board, I think we shouldn't shirk those responsibilities.
You're gonna chair the subcommittee?
That would be not fair because my future is clouded, but I know there are some people here who will take on that responsibility. And, as I believe we just got rid of a few subcommittees. We're talking about blending some subcommittees together. We're going to have new members to this board. This work never stops. We never get on top of it. We'll never be winning. It's continuous. There is never a time where we'll be on top of the pile. So I want us to recognize that there is no out. this work continues.
Could we tonight move to, issue, possibly another formal request to the department for the current, I mean, 'cause I agree that it's really important. Maybe annual isn't excessive, it seemed excessive to me, but certainly, we've never done it, we certainly need to take a deep dive at some point. But also, if we're not getting, we cannot exercise
Exactly.
our duties if we're not getting information, so perhaps we could, tonight just vote to reissue a formal request, to the department for current MOUs.
It's a good start. Any other thoughts?
I think this was agendized, right, because the current standing rules require us to establish a subcommittee before or by the first meeting in February. So are we just postponing till the next meeting in January, that decision on the subcommittee? And in the meantime, asking the department for, to respond to our request for current MOUs? Is that what we're doing? I guess I would suggest we're gonna go forward with this. Maybe we could try having our subcommittee be the entire board. And we take a meeting that we dedicate to reviewing MOUs and discussing it. Cause I just have to be honest, like the workload involved in all of these different things that I'm trying to do, like I want to do a good job. I care about this work tremendously, but it doesn't do any like, a service, not to anyone's benefit, ours or the public, if we just like continue taking our work and we can't do it, we can't do it well. So that's what I'm trying to weigh.
Perhaps we could have a special meeting just dedicated
Yeah.
to that.
So this could be a committee of the whole. Do we have any idea, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about
Hold on.
1,000 of these, or how many are there?
So wait a second, the suggestion we put on the board right, or put on the table right now, it violates the Brown Act and it's not, because it's not a subcommittee. Subcommittees have to be sorted out of our members, I believe. 3 is what we can have on the subcommittee right now, Jose, plus 1 person from the public.
So then I would make a motion that we modify the standing rules to say that the board or a subcommittee will review MOUs.
I think the city council has to approve our standing rules.
I thought they didn't.
For amendments, they don't,
Oh, okay.
just the initial.
Okay.
Perfect. And then we can attach special meeting.
But we can't do that tonight.
What? Oh, because we didn't adjourn.
Yes.
Yeah, so we put that, so I think
Unless we table this until the next meeting. And, is that okay? Vice Chair?
with them asking staff to ask the department to answer our request for current MOUs, I think they don't do that. All of those, because when you ask the volume, what the list, I thought there were quite a number.
I know.
Yeah, so then that's our request, is that you go ahead and make that request, staff, and then we put on the agenda for the 22nd, the modification of the standing rules to say that the board or a subcommittee.
I second that.
Okay,
I would also ask that, staff send out a poll, for a special meeting on these MOUs. That would fall sometime after the last January meeting.
Do we have our retreat on the calendar yet? Speaking of polls.
We don't have,
we have 2 dates that currently have quorum, January 18th and February 1st.
so how are we gonna decide which one we need to decide?
Well, there'll be a special meeting,
Can we focus on,
Yeah, sorry, I did it very sorry.
and then do that after the motion?
So the motion is to reissue a request for the Berkeley Police Department's MOUs and continue the conversation regarding the standing rules, section K, to be amended to allow for the full board to discuss instead of a subcommittee.
Excellent.
Is that-
Can you, just write current MOUs?
Current. Okay,
I just added to that, I think that is a generally a good idea for the way that you handle these things, that we have a high priority, but don't have a good way to build a subcommittee, is doing a special meeting. It's functionally not a bad way to do it.
If the topic's big enough.
Right, exactly.
okay. I'll proceed with the roll call vote. Board Member Calavita,
Yes.
Board Member Cayetano, Board Member Leftwich.
Yes.
Chair Moore,
Yes.
Board Member Moses.
Yes.
And Vice Chair Wilson.
Yes.
Motion carries. Okay,
And this takes us to 9G, nomination of candidates for the position of chair and vice chair for the 2025 calendar year, as outlined in section 1A to section 1C of the standing rules of the Police Accountability Board.
okay. So I'll go ahead and get us started with the language for the elections. As a reminder, section I, section 1 states that elections shall be held during the second January meeting of each year. During the board meeting presiding the election meeting, the nomination of the chair will precede the nomination of the vice chair, and the following nomination process will be followed for each office. The presiding chair declares the nomination process open. A board member nominates another board member or themselves. A board member must be present in order to be nominated and may decline the nomination. And the nomination is seconded. The nomination is failed if there is no second. So with that said, I'll pass it over to the current chair, Chair Moore.
Let's open it up.
Perfect.
Those for nominations, let's do them separately. Do we do vice first or do we do
We do chair first and then vice.
chair first? Okay, so I'd like to open up the nominations for chair of the Police Accountability Board. Stop and shut. There we go.
I nominate, board member Cayetano
Right.
for chair.
Do you accept the nomination?
I don't think there was a second. Do I have to say something or do I just say?
Do you want to-
Yes, I'm going.
Okay. Any other nominations? You can nominate yourselves.
Okay, I'm going to close the nomination period if there's no one else who wants to. Okay,
I will now proceed with the nominations of vice chair.
opening our nominations.
I nominate, Vice Chair Wilson.
Second that.
Are you willing, Vice Chair?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. Any other nominations?
All right, so just as a reminder, at the next meeting, we'll come back to continue the election process. There will be an opportunity for additional nominations at that time. So for now, our current nominees are Board Member Cayetano for chair and Vice Chair Wilson to continue as vice chair.
Okay, that takes us to public comment, agenda item number 10.
Okay. We will now proceed to public comment. As a reminder, speakers are generally allotted up to 3 minutes, but may be allotted less time if there are many speakers. They may comment on any matter within the board's jurisdiction at this time, except confidential personnel matters. Currently, there are no physically present speakers, so I'll move on to our virtually present attendees. At this time, would anybody attending virtually via Zoom or calling in, if you'd like to provide a public comment, please raise your hand or press star 9. Okay, I currently see one hand raised, Chair. Emily, you should have permission to speak. One moment while I get the timer on the screen for you.
Oh, I see the timer. Thank you. This is, you guys may all know this, but regarding the Public Records Act agenda item, there, as many of you probably do know this, but the city has its own retention records for how long it must retain, things like that. So that would be one place to look. And if they don't have the records beyond that time, the Public Records Act only require, they don't have to create them. So I think it would be good for people to know, A, are they complying with the retention schedule that exists? And if they are, it seems kind of a waste of time to be asking them to produce records that may not even be governed by that anymore because they're so old. Because the records that were requested were, I think, something like 2012 to 2018. So anyway, these are basic public records laws. If they don't have the records, they don't have to create or produce them. That's not what that law does, as many of you may already know as attorneys. So that's all I wanted to add to that discussion. And Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Are there any additional speakers for public comment? Chair, at this time, I do not see any hands raised.
Thank you. Well, that takes us to agenda item number 11, closed session.
So the public, feel free to remain in the webinar if you choose to do so. The meeting recording will stop as well as the audio and visual until the board returns from closed session. Thank you.
Thanks for the invitation.
And that takes us out of closed session. The board was updating on active cases. And now I'm going to ask for adjournment. Second?
Second.
Good evening, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Oh, that was hilarious. I know it's